Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, I'm going to briefly provide you some updates on the Sarah Everard case, and then also I want to introduce her to you. I think it is important that we humanize her, that we give her a identity. Basically, she's already got an identity, but we need to find out what that was. And I've got to say, it's not very easy to find. It seems as though the media are quite content just to give her a name and an age and where she's from, and not really much more. And so we're going to try and find out who she was and why her death has resonated so much with folk in Britain at this time. So some of the more interesting news that has come out is that there's been quite a lot of CCTV footage, dash cam footage, showing one particular scene that apparently has been highlighted is that the vehicle in which Cousins was seen, I think it was a white Vauxhall Astra. The doors, both front doors of the vehicle were actually open, and I think it had its hazard lights or emergency lights on, which suggests that, and this is how I interpret that information, you might interpret it differently, but to me it suggests that Sarah got into the vehicle with Cousins and then exited the vehicle and tried to perhaps run away, and then he caught her, and in that tussle, that is perhaps where she lost the beanie in the bush. Now, of course, as I say, that is speculation. There has also been some speculation that the way that the officer was able to lure her was basically by using a warrant card and basically saying, you might have said something like, listen, you're not allowed out after dark, there's lockdown this or whatever, I need to get you off the street and something like that. And she possibly would have been friendly, she possibly would have been trusting. I don't know how charming this guy was, but I do get the feeling he may have been in uniform just because he was working until 8 p.m. His shift ended at 8 p.m. and so why wouldn't he be in uniform? I also think the fact that he hired that car, they had two cars at home, a black Seat Exio and a Peugeot 107. I think the fact that he hired that white Vauxhall is definitely a sign that this was premeditated. And I think he knew that he had the ability to use his position to his own advantage and to the disadvantage of poor Sarah Everard. And so she may have, he may have sort of alerted her and said, look, you can't be out this late or something, and then on the pretext of just talking to her, she may have approached the vehicle, and that is when he may have tried to I think it's possible he either opened the door for her to get in and she didn't get in, or she got in and she ran away after realizing maybe there's something wrong. For example, why is the inside of this car so generic? It's not a police vehicle. What's going on there? I also think it's important to bear in mind the context of Cousins exposing himself twice in a McDonald's 3 days earlier. You kind of get the feeling something was going on with him that was driving him to a denouement, right? I would say denouement, but the proper way is
denouement.
I also want to quote someone on Patreon that made a comment about her experience with flashes, and she said, I used to live in a flat where I could take a shortcut into the garden and my flat door by walking through a little park area that was a grassed over rail track. She said it saved 10 minutes from walking by the streets. She says, but the problem was it was a flash's paradise. The first time it happened, I was really shocked, carried on walking, walked to the police station where they took a statement, drove me to see if he was still there, but no, he wasn't. It was 2 hours later, and then drove home. Well, they drove her home. It happened 3 or 4 more times, she says, while I lived there, and to be honest, I got a bit blasé about it. I did realize later that while statistically most flashes don't progress into assaults, most perpetrators of more serious sexual assaults have in fact been flashes in their history. And before we get to Sarah Everard, I just want to quote some of the UK Office's national statistics, where they talk about the only 4% of women told us they reported incidents of harassment to an official organisation, and about half of those said that they didn't really feel that reporting would help at all. I'm not a woman, so I don't know if I can talk about that. I've certainly covered, in the Oscar Pistorius case, that whole thing of a woman being silenced. That definitely is true. I do remember a big scenario happening in South Africa where women were told that there was some kind of attack on a woman, and then someone said, could have been a police officer, said something like, well, you shouldn't wear short skirts, and then that prompted women to then wear short skirts as kind of a protest to say, well, we can wear whatever we want to wear. What I'd like to do in this episode, and I'll probably leave it to the end of the episode, is venture into that very, very risky area. A man talking about something that was said, I think, by Anna Burley. I think she told BBC Radio Live, she said something like, quote, "It's not our fault. Women aren't the reason women get attacked," right? And I think just as a way of introducing that idea, that comment, how to respond to that, I think it's worth mentioning something that a man said. Stuart Edwards said something along the lines, and this is someone who lives 5 minutes away from where Sarah went missing. He tweeted, and this is a quote, "Aside from giving as much space as possible on quieter streets and keeping face visible, is there anything else men can reasonably do to reduce the anxiety/spook factor?" End quote. And that tweet received 27,000 likes and more than 3,000 retweets. But there are other tweets where women feel clearly victimized that have been retweeted 120,000 times, where it's a tweet asking if women ever change their routes because of anxiety, faked phone calls, or even run in fear. Now, I want to quickly address this. I will address it in more detail at the end of the episode. But I'm from South Africa. I'm in a country where it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you feel unsafe walking out at night. And I can tell you, basically, when it is dark in the area that I live, and I live in quite a relatively safe area, relatively upmarket area. It's really not far from a police station, but it is very unsafe to be walking around after dark, whether you're a man or a woman. And it doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel right that the streets kind of don't belong to the folks in the suburbs, right? It's just not safe. And I know that when I came back I lived in South Korea for a while, I lived in the UK for a while, where a lot of people use public transport and then they walk home. I was one of them. Or they catch a taxi home or whatever. You do such a lot of walking in those countries. And in South Africa, well, we virtually don't have public transport. It's very seldom used, and there's very little walking home. Certainly by certain segments of the population, and you hear all the time about joggers being attacked, even hikers being attacked. And so whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that the safety issue? What I'm trying to say is, although it's a problem in the UK, the problem is, I don't know how many orders of magnitude worse in South Africa, which is Cape Town is known as I think the 20th most dangerous city in the world. And so whose fault is it that the city is unsafe? What are you supposed to do about it? And I think how one addresses this question, who is responsible, is, I think, something that really needs to be dealt with from a true crime perspective, not from the perspective from, let's say, feminism, or from the perspective of if you're a man or a woman, or even if you're a policeman. I think you need to address it from a true crime perspective. In other words, how do you prevent crime? Why do crimes happen? How do crimes happen? And not to couch it in the language of whose fault is it, but how do you deal with the psychology, the criminal psychology, and how do you undo it, right? Okay, and so now let's get to know Sarah Everard. And what I'm going to do is go through, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 articles that have variously covered who she is in some detail. I don't think it's really to our satisfaction. We don't really get to know her as well as we would like to, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click the blue icon on the bottom right, hit the notification bell, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So you may or may not be aware that a Wikipedia page has popped up in the last couple of hours. Death of Sarah Everard. There's a fair amount of content there. The first article I want to refer to is from The Independent, and the title of the article is Sarah Everard, Everything We Know About the 30-Year-Old and What Happened to Her. And what is incredible in this article is there's about 2, maybe 6 lines, but you could really shorten that to about 4 lines, maybe 5 lines at the most, because there's a photo on the one end, you know, sort of basically filling up half the space of the sentences on the right. So there's basically, this is the sum total of when they say, who is Sarah Everard, right? And this was an article written a day ago in The Independent. Basically, this is a quote from the article. Sarah Everard was a 33-year-old who lived in Brixton, South London, but was originally from York. She is said to have graduated from St. Cuthbert's Society at Durham University in 2008 before moving to London and working as a marketing executive. So what we get from that is that she's 33 years old, where she lives, where she's originally from, and what she studied. And I don't know about you, but I find that a very cardboard cutout description of a person. So this article is all about supposedly what happened to her, and most of the article is really about that. It's about what happened to her. Far more text is devoted to the story about what happened to her, and also Wayne Couzens, than really about her. And isn't that the problem? In your effort to introduce her and humanize her, there's just not much effort put into it. I'm talking about by the media. And this article appears to have been written by Chiara, I don't know if that's a lady, but I think the media needs to try a little bit harder to get to know the woman that they're writing about in a case like this. It does mention who are her family, boyfriends and friends. So father's name is Jeremy. He's a professor of electronics at the University of York, and mother Sue doesn't say anything about what she does. Perhaps she's a housewife. It's not clear from this, but apparently they traveled from their home in York to London to help in the search alongside her brother James and sister Katie. So it seems like she's got 2 siblings, James and Katie. Not too much about them. What is mentioned here is that her disappearance was completely out of character. And that is the beginning of getting to know her, except they don't really expand upon that. Well, what kind of character did she have? Oh, I see a little bit further on in the article is a friend, someone who studied with that university, so this is going quite way back, describing her as beautiful, thoughtful, and incredibly kind, and that she was looking forward to starting a new job. Now, I think already in those words you are getting a sense of probably what happened. So the fact that Sarah's beautiful I think, attracted the attention of Cousins, right? I think her beauty caught his attention. I also think the fact that she was wearing bright clothing probably caught his attention. I also think the fact that she's athletic caught his attention. I also think, based on my research into the Ripper, the fact that she was probably alone or relatively alone late at night made him think he would have relative anonymity to do something and not be seen. And obviously he was partially right. There might not have been eyewitnesses, but there were certainly digital eyes watching him. So besides the beautiful aspect, the fact that she's presented here as thoughtful, you can kind of imagine a scenario where if she's a good person, she's a positive person, she's a happy presence. If someone would approach her, such as a policeman, she wouldn't necessarily be circumspect. She would be probably inclined to want to be cooperative, helpful, and friendly, right? Where she's described as thoughtful and incredibly kind. So you would think that what is the appropriate response in a situation like this, where a woman is walking alone and someone that appears to be a police officer asks or engages a woman? What is the appropriate response? Is the appropriate response get lost? Is the appropriate response show me some form of ID? Is the appropriate response just keep your distance? What is the appropriate response? And I think she wondered that herself and thought, well, maybe the appropriate response is, this guy's concerned about me. Let me reassure him that I'm fine. And through that is how she got perhaps lured towards his car, right? Does that make sense? And so we also want to get to know Wayne Cousins, and I can appreciate people saying, no, we don't need to do that. We want to get to know Sarah Everard. She's the innocent person here. We don't care who Wayne Cousins was, he can rot in hell. But I think if you want to solve the problem in society, because it is a societal problem, it is a systemic problem, you need to look at both sides of the equation. By getting to know Wayne Cousins' story, we're not trying to sympathize with him, we're trying to get into his mind and also see, where does he come from? How did he how did society create this creature? How did it happen? What is going on? And I think part of the answer to that is him exposing himself a few days before and him apparently getting away with it. There being no big brouhaha about it. There didn't seem any censure from his work. Why? How did that happen? Why wasn't he under some kind of monitoring or surveillance? And the fact that, well, I don't know for sure, but if there wasn't some kind of repercussions to that, did that give him a sense of, did that embolden him? Did that give him a sense that, wow, maybe I can actually get away with something? I can do something brazen and get away with it. Rose Woolard, her friend at university, describes Sarah as an exceptional friend, dropping everything to be there to support her friends whenever they need her. And she said recently she was telling her the good news about her new role as a senior marketing account manager. And so what that is kind of giving you the sense that she was quite positive, she was in quite a good mood, and in a situation like that she might not be paranoid or cynical or critical of a stranger in uniform's attempt to engage her. Now, I don't know what you guys think about that. Do you think that is to some extent an appropriate response, is that we become more cynical, critical, and paranoid as a society of one another, of people we don't know? Is that the way to go? So now I want to deal with a profile of her in the Telegraph. She's described here as caring and fun-filled, and that she attracted friends wherever she went. But again, this idea of a caring person, a considerate person, a thoughtful person, I don't think she is going to be the kind of person who, if someone approaches her, as Wayne Couzens likely did, would say, get lost, or basically just ignore him, or kind of give him the cold shoulder. You can kind of get the sense that she might smile, that she might try to be forthcoming and cooperative, and that this would then count against her ultimately. The article in the Telegraph provides quite a lot more detail. I think some of the best detail that I've seen online. This particular article came out on the 11th of March, so fairly recently. It describes her as having a vast and fiercely loyal circle of friends. And I think this is possibly partly why she has galvanized such activism. I think part of it is the indignation, the outrage that this shouldn't have happened to her, that she didn't deserve this, right? But also her network is people who are marketers. So it would be people who know how to put their message out there in a compelling way, in an intelligent way, in a way that would resonate. And isn't that exactly what happened? They go on to say, Sarah was never short of company and had a happy and varied social life. So you get the idea that she's friendly. And again, that is what I think played, to some extent, a role in Couzens successfully engaging her. He may have said, good evening, are you okay? Are you, can I help you get home, or we need to get you home before, I don't actually know. In South Africa, our curfew has been extended to midnight to 4 a.m. We've got to be indoors. What is it like in the UK? Is it 10 o'clock? But he may have said something like, if it was 10 o'clock, he may have said, okay, we need to get you home. And she may have then said, well, don't worry, I live just around the corner, or something like that. And he may have said, excuse me, are you sure you're going to make it on time? And then she may have come a bit closer, and he may have opened the door for her and said, look, get in, I'll drive you home. And she may have then, I think she was an intelligent person. I also think she was athletic. So I think she would have backed herself, possibly in a foot race, that she'd be able to escape him. And perhaps she didn't. Perhaps she couldn't. The article in the Telegraph goes on to describe her as born in Surrey. So she was from York, but she was born in Surrey in 1987, the youngest of 3 children, with older siblings James and Catherine, or Katie. I think you can also take that into consideration. If you're the youngest of 3 children, and I'm generalizing here, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's this way or not, but often the youngest child, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, I'm just trying to get into the psychology of the incident. But sometimes the youngest child is to some extent spoiled and treated with a lot more, I don't know, in a kind of a different way as the firstborn and the middle child. I'm the middle child in my family. I'm not saying it's always like this. I'm just saying in a situation where the youngest child is given the lion's share of attention, is given a lot of, I don't know, like exceptions and so on, you can have a situation also where the youngest child might be friendly and more trusting than the other siblings in that scenario, in that dynamic. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on it, just that what is the likely psychology that was at work here? I think often the youngest child, I won't say is the favorite of the parents, but the parents sometimes learn their lessons on the eldest child. The second child is sort of, okay, this again. And then the third child tends to get often a lot of the benefit of the learning curve that comes from raising the older children. So I guess what I'm saying is I wonder whether that played into the events. Then it goes on to describe her as sensible and organized, but with a sense of adventure. Again, the sense of adventure may play into the fact that she was out walking through the common. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, though, but you can kind of imagine that she's fit, she's young. You can get the sense that she's got a bit of confidence based on her athleticism, and she, because of that confidence, she would be not afraid. And who would expect to be in a situation that she found herself in? I'm just saying that would have aggravated the situation she was in. Someone, if you can imagine, if it was someone, say, 50 years older, they would feel more vulnerable to be alone late at night walking up to a strange man, right? But a younger person, it's kind of normal. It's kind of, you might walk up to you might approach someone in a bar. It's something that young people do. So, if you're trying to eradicate this, you're trying to eradicate that random aspect, it's not going to be very easy, is it? So according to the Telegraph, it refers to the family moving to York when Sarah was still young. Her father, 67, married to Sue, 63, got a job as a professor of electronics at the city's university. The family home was in a kind of a cul-de-sac in the Heslington area of York, and Sarah was often seen playing in the street with her brother and sister, as well as with other local children. You get the feeling that she had a normal upbringing, a happy upbringing, a safe upbringing. Neighbors who watched her grow up said that they were struggling to come to terms with the tragedy. The Evening Standard describes Everard in terms of her work, and that is a powerful indicator of who someone is. What do they do every day? A person's identity tends to be mixed up to a large extent in the role that you perform each day in your job. After all, you spend so much time of your life in a particular role and in a particular area. And so she worked at many marketing and PR agencies since moving to London. You get the idea that if she's a friendly, outgoing, social person, she's a good communicator, she's a compelling, I won't say storyteller, but someone who can convey a message in a way that is effective. You get the sense that there would also be confidence in that position, someone who is engaging, right? Someone who's interactive, someone who's communicative, right? Not someone who's a shrinking violet, right? She moved to London, graduating from senior account manager to group account director between 2009 and 2020, according to LinkedIn. Now, I've gone to that LinkedIn profile. It definitely is the correct profile. It is the one regarding, or the one related to Flipside, which is the new job she's going to take over, freelance client lead. And that profile has been taken down, possibly for privacy reasons. It is interesting how these things happen, how the social media tends to get scrubbed in some of these cases. Apparently last month she started a new job at Flipside Group, an agency based in Holborn. On her LinkedIn profile, while it was still available, she described herself, and I don't think you can get a more powerful indicator of identity than self-identifying as a positive presence with a caring attitude for her work and team. And her friend says she was looking forward to starting a new position. Now, a positive presence is also someone who, in a given situation, is going to see the glass as half full, is going to be optimistic. And so if she's approached by a police officer, isn't she going to tend to be engaging with that person, right? We look at Sarah Everard and we sort of get a sense that she's beautiful, she's innocent, She's talented. She had her whole life ahead of her. She doesn't deserve this to happen to her. And we wonder, is that the kind of person we should be in this world that we live in? And I think the answer for a lot of people is yes. We should be a positive presence. We should be happy. We should be, innocent, or whatever the word is. I would say, coming from true crime, that we can't be totally positive, that we've got to be critical, we've got to be cynical, that a bit of paranoia is healthy. Now, you might resent that. You might say, how dare you? We want to live in a world where we expect to walk down the street and everything's going to be safe. Well, I can tell you, I live in a world where you expect the opposite, and to not do so is crazy. We've got columnists in South Africa who talk about paranoia as kind of a healthy default setting, an appropriate default setting. In other words, that your paranoia is something that is going to keep you safe. I'm not saying that the crime levels in South Africa are normal or good or acceptable. I'm saying paranoia is the appropriate response. And what I'm saying is, in the UK, I'm not saying, hey, everybody become paranoid, become critical, become cynical. Your country isn't South Africa. I'm just saying possibly the appropriate response is to be a little more cynical about the world that we live in, right? Then there's some more interesting information from the Telegraph from the 10th of March in an article by Martin Evans, a crime correspondent, and he talks about her craving adventure in 2013. So 7-8 years ago, she took 6 months out and went traveling to South America. She scuba dived, she went trekking in the Andes. It's interesting she chose South America rather than Africa. One's got to wonder, which one. Perhaps she should have wondered, perhaps that's the safer destination, or it's, one wonders why she went to South America. Then she returned to London, picked up her career again, and landed jobs with a series of companies. You get the idea that she was quite effortless in getting positions, that she was talented, intelligent, someone who would sort of be convincing, someone that you would want to be part of your team. This article also talks about her starting a new role as a digital marketing executive with a company called Flipside, and she was excited about that. She was living 200 miles from her parents, but she spoke to members of her family regularly and kept in touch with a large group of friends on social media. And I think part of that, keeping in touch with a large group of friends, probably within the marketing milieu, is probably how and why this case got so much traction, and as much traction as it has. She, and this I think is quite interesting, she helped raise money for a mental health charity that supports people who suffer from suicidal thoughts and depression. That's quite interesting. She also recently began a relationship with Josh Louth, also a marketing executive, and again I think it's because of her boyfriend and his connections, his experience, his ability to market a message, that the message of Sarah Everard has gotten out to the extent that it has. He was the first person to report her missing when she didn't turn up. Josh was the person who she was supposed to meet the next day, and then when she didn't turn up, he called the police. Josh was the person she was speaking to for 15 minutes, and that was the last time anyone ever heard from her. Josh was the last person she spoke to. And so how the search started was they sort of started from where the signal of her phone terminated, right? That was part of how they searched for her. Another aspect was they got sniffer dogs, or I guess tracker dogs, searching for her scent. And I think those dogs probably would have given an indication possibly of where her scent stopped. I did notice some photos of dogs on dinghies, and you may not be aware of it, but some dogs are able to track scent even on water or bodies of water. As far as I know, cadaver dogs, I'm not sure about tracking dogs. I'm not sure if tracking dogs can do that. As a testament to her popularity, her disappearance sparked a massive social media campaign by her friends. This is from the Telegraph. So it's because of her popularity that there was this massive social media response, which galvanized a lot of people and has caused Sarah to become, to some extent, a symbol, and perhaps she'll ultimately become an icon of, the plight of women in the UK, perhaps even beyond the UK. Posters were put up appealing for information, and you can just imagine all the marketing mechanisms that she was once part of now activating kind of on her behalf, right? For an important cause, of course. And of course, what all of this did was it put quite a lot of pressure on the investigators. You're getting a public outcry, you're getting a lot of media attention, and so to their credit, they were able to solve this case quite quickly. There's also an endorsement of her was published in the York Press by Fulford School head Steve Lewis, and he described Sarah as vibrant, caring, a much valued member of our school community, and that she left the school in 2005. He refers to her as still lovingly remembered by those who taught and knew her. Her joy, intelligence, and positive spirit shone within the school. She was a lovely pupil and friend. So once again, you're getting this positivity that's coming out. And again, a sense of, if she was walking alone at night and somebody approached her, she'd probably think that it was quite safe and it wouldn't do any harm just to approach this person and engage with them. Then in The Guardian, in an article published on the 10th of March, I think it's written by, can't quite see, Sarah Marsh. It just refers to her cousin Tom telling the Mirror that the family was hopeful at that stage, and then also her uncle Nick telling Sky News that the family was distraught when they heard about the arrest of the police officer. So you're having also the family members getting involved with the media. As far as I'm aware, the breakthrough happened on March 9th, and March 9th was the day the police used sniffer dogs, searching the gardens around the search site and the route that they imagined that she took home. And I think probably the sniffer dogs should have been brought out earlier. Officers searched a pond in Clapham Common and also drains. They also released fresh images of Sarah wearing that coat that she was wearing, and then appealed for the public's help. Then the Metropolitan Police set up a cordon around Poinders Court, and Uber, this is really interesting, Uber began using their smartphone software to pinpoint which of their drivers were in the area when Sarah vanished. So you also had the help from that company. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of the Uber drivers, it was their dash cam that actually identified the vehicle that Cousins was driving. Doesn't that make sense? So it was at 11:59 on March the 9th that the Met tweeted that they'd arrested a police officer in Kent. And I've got to say that I think part of what made the crime more tangible, gave a sense of her exact movements, was the use of these animals, basically saying, okay, she walked over here, this is her scent, and this is where the scent ends. And this is the crossing of digital technology, cutting edge phone data information, GPS tracking, dash cams, all that kind of thing, and then animals filling in the missing dots that need to be joined. For those interested, I'll put a link in the description to the Wikipedia page on the death of Sarah Everard. It'll probably be expanded rapidly over the next coming days and weeks. I also wouldn't be surprised if the Wikipedia page was started, or the person responsible was one of the marketing folks associated or friends of Sarah Everard. So now I want to talk about this quote that it's not our fault, women aren't the reason women get attacked, right? And just ask you what you think about that. Is the counter to that, well, it's men's fault that women are getting attacked, right? So, in other words, is it basically just broadly men need to sort this out, right? And so my response is the following. First of all, it's true, it's not women's fault, but I would also say it's also not men's fault. It is society's fault. So let me rephrase that just in another way, right? Is it nobody's fault that this happened? I don't think you could say that. But could you also say it's everybody's fault? And I think there's some truth in both. That to some extent it is nobody's fault, and to some extent it is everybody's fault. The solution I'm going to present to you, you're not going to like, because the solution is basically that they say it takes a village to raise a child. And I think in Sarah's case, you get the feeling that that is what happened, that she was raised in a loving family, surrounded by friends and happiness, and she had a happy life. She was happy in her work. She had some kind of social status related to her lot in life, and she was just, someone who was doing well, and you can see why she was positive. She had a lot to be positive about. If you look at Wayne Couzens, he had a lot not to be positive about. He couldn't find a partner, or he struggled to find a partner. His partner he found ultimately in a different country. He went from one job to the next. He seems to be from a somewhat dysfunctional family, just in terms of the impression I get is that Sarah Everard's parents kind of stuck together, and there's quite a strong family unit. I don't get that sense with Wayne Couzens. I could be wrong. But the answer to when we say who's to blame is the village. The village is to blame for not raising Wayne Couzens in the way Wayne Couzens needed to be raised. And I think in the impossibility of that statement is the answer, which is you can't expect the village to raise the idiots, right? You can't expect the village to raise everybody properly. And unfortunately, I think therein lies the rub, because that is, I think, what we're going to need to try and get back to. But we live in a society where those who do well, and those who don't fall through the cracks, and they come back as drug addicts or alcoholics or people with depression. But you definitely have people who are failures and have-nots, and those who don't live happily ever after. And whose responsibility are those people in this time of social media, where you're either a star, you're either well liked, or you are forgotten about, you're ignored, you are passed over? And so whose responsibility would you say is it for redress, to make a caring society? Are we a society that just cares when we're triggered? Are we just a society that only cares when something tragic and devastating happens? Because we shouldn't be. I understand the whole thing where you say, advising women not to go out alone is victim blaming, and that, women are disrespected, attacked, sexually assaulted. I'm going to say something very controversial now, but you do have a situation where men are sexually active and they're looking for sexual satisfaction, and they will try their luck with a woman and they'll get turned down, and they'll try their luck with another woman and they'll get turned down. And I wonder what is the advice? Should a man not approach a woman? And should he what should he do? Because the impression I get from when they talk about wolf whistling or whatever is that a man if you had to do a poll with a woman and say, have you ever experienced harassment? Now, wouldn't you say that any time a male approaches you where that attention is unwanted is harassment? So if you take it from the male's perspective and you say, okay, how do you know when you shouldn't approach a woman, right? And you say, well, if she's not looking at you, you don't, or you just shouldn't approach women generally. So how does that then apply to someone who is single and perhaps lacks confidence and also has been single for a long time? Should they just sort of wait out the storm? What should happen? And so I know women listening to this will say, wow, that is really sexist of you to say, it sounds like you are this or it sounds like you are that. So if I take it out of that dualistic approach, you're a woman, I'm a man, that whole scenario. If you're going to take it further than that and say, well, it's not even about men or women, it's about whatever. If you take, for example, a dog, I've got a puppy, you take him for a walk, can you expect that the puppy not to show an interest in other dogs? And there are definitely certain dogs that feel the attention is unwanted. They don't want to be approached by another dog. But there are definitely other dogs that want to. So how does a dog find that out? Well, part of it is that they approach and they are then rebuffed, right? I don't know if you can say that being approached and being rebuffed is sexual harassment, because I think the sexual drive, the same as the way it's in a dog, is in human beings as well. So I don't know how you get rid of that, and I don't know whether you should. I mean, should you get rid of it? The thing is, I think you can expect as a woman, especially if you're an attractive woman, I think you can expect to draw the attention of men, right? Perhaps also women. And so if you dress a certain way, you might attract more attention. The thing is, I don't really see that as the solution to the problem, to say, well, don't go out at night or don't dress. But at the same time, I don't think you can say the solution is in this or that gender lies the problem. I think the problem lies in how does the village talk to its members about how they should approach one another and what to do about those that have fallen to the periphery. What about them? And it's definitely a difficulty where you've got someone who is perhaps not as attractive, not well liked, perhaps antisocial. How are they supposed to be cared for? What do you do about those? And I think there's a certain aspect certainly I find with true crime, where you feel like, in the same way that in banking you write off debt, there's just no way, it's something you've just got to make provision for. It feels like in our society you've got to make provision for the reality that certain crimes are going to happen and that you can't really prevent them, or that it's difficult to prevent them. And it's because of that scenario that I think it makes sense to be somewhat cynical. It's sad, but I think to be somewhat cynical in a situation where someone approaches you, I think is normal and appropriate. To be somewhat paranoid is normal and appropriate, and that at least is some sort of response. The next part of the conversation is very difficult, but if you are living in a sexualized society and someone is not being satisfied, they are being sexualized but they're not being satisfied, then what kind of thing? And you might say, well, that is the responsibility of the sexualized person, but I would say no. I would say, isn't that the responsibility of the village? And I don't think the village even thinks about that, about its own standards of sexualizing itself. Think about just and I don't want to equate this with Sarah Everard at all. I'm not saying that she was sexualized. I'm saying we are living in a sexualized society, and it looks like that may have had an impact on Wayne Couzens. And isn't that a problem? And how are we going to address that? And where does one address that? When I go onto Instagram, and I don't know what this says about me, but if I go into Instagram, today I was searching for a triathlete that I know, then a lot of the images that I'm presented with on Instagram are girls in bikinis. And is that appropriate? Is that something that social media should be doing? So I hope you found this analysis worthwhile. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've at least found it thought-provoking. I'm sure some of you out there are going to be livid and upset and angry that perhaps it's not as politically correct as you would like it to be. I'm just providing my perspective, and I don't think that the only people who should be talking about Sarah Everard are women. I think it's a conversation that many people should be having, and I think one should take the fact that this is resonating with people and look for real solutions to real issues beyond blaming. In the same way that women say, well, don't victim blame us, I don't think the appropriate thing is to really to blame anyone. I think obviously Wayne Couzens is legally responsible and accountable, but beyond that I think there is the issue, as I've said, about the village, and what does the village become in the 21st century? You know, where are we in that area? All right, so I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to speak a little bit more about Elena, and I will probably be doing another episode just as more evidence and information comes out. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.